Hey there, podcast fans. Welcome back to Stories from the River. This is your host, Charlie Malouf, and I've got a return guest, Nick Craig. Nick, welcome back to the pod.
Charlie, thank you so much. As always, I so much enjoy any chance I get to hang out with you.
The feeling is mutual.
Welcome to Stories from the River, a show in which we go behind the scenes at Broad River Retail.
Nick, I think when I first read your article 5+ years ago, I never would have dreamt then that I would have a podcast and get to have you on my podcast, not once, but twice. I mean, it's a pretty special moment for me right now.
Well, that's because you're living your purpose. And when you live your purpose, things that are non-linear occur and amazing things happen. So I'm so glad to be part of your purpose.
I love it, Nick. Well, you've helped me discover my purpose. And so we had an event that's from the Core Leadership Institute, the Purpose to Impact program. And this is an event, a program that you've created. And you hosted it at Broad River Retail for 2 days in October 22nd and 23rd of 2024. And so that was a remarkable event. I want to talk about that event. But first, just like you like to kind of go back to the beginning, I want to go back a little bit, Nick. And last time we somewhat alluded to and talked a little bit on the surface of your personal story, but for our audience, can you tell us a little bit more about kind of your journey, your purpose journey, and also thread through that kind of what you do? What do you do every day? I mean, I think you're a professor, you're a writer, you're a podcaster, you're a consultant. And so let me turn the floor over to you and kind of get us up to speed with kind of how you got here.
Look, how I got here was probably like many people listening of how each of us got where we are, is that we stumbled and we realized that some things didn't work, and then we did something different, and then it began to work for us. I spent a lot of my life thinking that the key to success was to be the smartest person and be really smart and have the answers and know everything that needed to be known, and to be able to help people do the same. And what I realized was at some point is that wasn't enough. And the people that were doing that weren't actually being the leaders that either I wanted them to be or they wanted to be. That at some level, there's a deeper wisdom. And that when I was with people who had that deeper sense of wisdom, what I've discovered was most anything that we would do would work. And when that wasn't the case, no matter how good all the amazing things is that I had, and I was working with professors from the Harvards and the MITs and whatever, and we had the best stuff, it would fail. And I began to realize that the key to the kingdom was that deeper wisdom, and can we access it, each of us? Can we access that deep wisdom inside of each of us that is the key to having us transform the world around us? And that's the key. So in some ways, that's the thing that I realized I didn't have myself. And then I realized I needed to not only figure it out for myself, but I needed to help other people do it, because I didn't want to hang out with people who didn't have it. To be clear, I mean, at some level, that's the basic reason why I'm sitting here today. Was I said, okay, this is not working for me.
So it wasn't working for you, and you said, I've got to go on this personal exploration to figure out what this deep wisdom is. Okay, but it doesn't just like nirvana doesn't just happen. Kind of how did you arrive there?
Yeah, so I think the first step for all of us is to realize there's a gap and we want to close it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, when you sit in that gap long enough, what starts to show up is what is it that might be helpful. And I think for me, I started to go on a journey of discovery of how do you step into that deeper calling and that deeper sense of meaning for ourselves. And, once again, you just read whatever there was to read, you read Man's Search for Meaning and that's a fabulous book. Or you read, there's just all kinds of different things, and you're trying to get your hands around what is this that matters to us. And in some ways, I started to figure it out for myself. And in the process, I also started to meet people who said, oh, wow, that's really great. Then you should come help me. And one of the people that did that was a gentleman named Bill George, and he was teaching at Harvard Business School, and he was teaching a course on authentic leadership. And it was a topic I actually also had spent time thinking about. And we could finish each other's sentences. And I had figured out all the things he hadn't, and vice versa. And one of the things I'd really figured out was purpose. And this is one of the things that was not working for him in the classroom. And basically, we combined our efforts to create what turned out to be one of the most successful Harvard Business School MBA classes. And so that's sort of how it happened. And, you know, when I say it this way, it sounds like it's kind of like, how did that actually happen? Because it almost doesn't make any sense. But I do believe that what happened was when purpose grabs us, that it makes amazing things happen that we could never like write down and say, here's what I'd like to have happen next.
That's some really good stuff. That's one that people are going to have to kind of go back and listen to again. So you mentioned Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And I'm sure there were other books, readings, articles. You start to figure this out for yourself. And so just to connect the dots of the implicit elements, you were a professor at Harvard at that time?
No, I was not a professor at Harvard.
Okay.
I was the guy who made all the things that they came up with work in the real world with real leaders and real organizations.
Okay.
And I was everybody's first officer. I worked with a whole bunch of different professors. And I was the guy that would look at it and go, no, that is not going to work. Or, okay, let's see what we can do. And I would go play with it and make it work. Then they would write it up and turn it into a Harvard Business Review article or and use it in class. And then they would bring me into class and say, could you talk about what actually happened? I'd be like, okay, here we go.
So you were a consultant?
I was a consultant.
Okay.
Yeah.
And were you on your own or associated with a firm?
At different times. You know, I worked for a couple of Harvard Business School professors at one period of time. Okay. Michael Beer, who was teaching and doing a bunch of stuff. And I helped MIT create their Center for Leadership with Deb Ancona and did a bunch of work with them over a number of years. So once again, I was in the system, but I was the person that had to actually make things work.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so Bill George was a professor at Harvard.
Exactly.
Okay. And he had this class, was it Authentic Leadership class?
He had a course on Authentic Leadership. It was a 14-week class, and some stuff worked, some stuff didn't. And I had figured out a bunch of things, and both we were able to have work together to create something that really worked. And then I was the one who was then going and working with the General Electrics and all the others in the world who came and said, hey, listen, that's great. Can you come help us? And he'd look and say, okay, go figure that out. And so I'd go do all the big company adventures. Okay.
And how soon from when you guys started co-collaborating did you produce this book? It's called Discover Your True North?
Well, actually, yeah, it's actually the workbook, which is the field book. We pretty much started writing it almost after we met. It was one of these things where it was like, oh, instantly. He said, oh, great. And then they called and said, oh, yeah, sure. And I was like, all of a sudden I went from 0 to 100 in writing a book.
Okay, that's fantastic.
Once again, I want to say to everybody listening, the thing about purpose is when you really get clear, you better watch out because all of a sudden crazy, crazy, amazing things can happen.
Yeah, yeah. And so you guys create this Discover Your True North workbook, you write this book, and then what happens next for you?
What happens is that he gets a call from GE and the head of HR says, hey, listen, when you did the case, what are you doing? He says, oh, and they say, oh, great, we'd like to have some of that too.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I'm working with 30 of the top 300 at that time, one of the most successful entities in the world, trying this new crazy stuff, which I didn't know exactly if it was going to work.
Okay.
And once again, all of a sudden, these guys really like this stuff. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is, as you know, Jeff shows up, because he was showing up because the helicopter would land. You hear the helicopter landing outside, and out would come Jeff Immelt. And I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. So once again, it was stepping into that, teaching courses at Wharton on their advanced management programs, and then going and working with Unilever as they were transforming their things. So this all started to unfold. Okay.
Yeah,
it sounds like impossible and crazy, and it was all impossible and it was all crazy. And that's what happens.
It sounds like the boulder is starting to run downhill really quickly.
The boulder, yes. Let's just say I was chasing after the snowball because it was going much faster than I was.
Wow.
So,
okay.
yeah.
So you developed this program, and then when does the Core Leadership Institute come about? And your book, Leading, is it With Purpose or From Purpose?
Yeah, so the book, Leading from Purpose. That's right.
Leading from Purpose.
So basically, the Core Leadership Institute ends up being the corporate entity that gets created. And in some sense, the wording of core is who are you at your core? And there's many elements that what makes that up. Purpose is only one of them. Being authentic is another. And the combination and then getting results, you take all three of those together and you start to get something that's the core of the essence of what really makes things happen. And so in some sense, that's where that comes from. But we were starting to deliver programs globally all over the world, and which we still do. And in some ways, working with many different people and different cultures and seeing how this all works. And I just did the programs in Vietnam, and I was co-led with a woman who did all the stories and everything in Vietnamese. It was being translated for me in real time, and then everybody was crying and saying, "Oh my God, that's amazing," or whatever. And I was getting it translated, and I'm like, okay, that's really good. So it even works in all kinds of culture. We've run the program in Turkey and Poland, all kinds of different places where I was like, I don't think it's going to work.
You're jumping ahead.
I don't know. I'm not. I'm sort of like, Charlie, you and I are going to jump all over the place today.
And when you're saying the program works, you're talking about the Purpose to Impact program.
The program
correct?
we do, or the work we do on purpose, where we wake up people to discover that deeper purpose and how to lead from it. You know, over the years, we've really figured out what to do to really make that happen, right? And at the same time, I'll say, Charlie, you know, when you and I first met, you'd already figured out a bunch of stuff. And I was here to support you because I thought what you were doing was the most coolest thing. Here's a guy who's selling furniture, talking about purpose. And I was like, that is so cool.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. Well, I just wanted to kind of take stock. You combine with Bill George. You guys are helping each other out, filling the gaps. You solve this purpose element of it, which is really the core and the essence of who you are. That's the Core Leadership Institute comes out of that. The Purpose to Impact program comes out of that. You've got big companies, big executives saying, I want some of that. They start hiring you. You're like, okay, we'll go here, here, here. And it's being done in the most remote places all over the world. And it works in different languages, Turkey, Vietnam, big companies, small companies. And so you're taking thousands of people through this program. Somewhere along the way, I think you become a Harvard professor. Is that true?
No, actually. Truth of the matter is I didn't want to have to grade papers.
Okay, so you're not a Harvard professor.
I am not a Harvard professor, but everybody always thinks I live in a town called Harvard as well. So it's a really confusing. The truth of the matter is that I find that the gift I have is to work with companies over a long-term journey. Okay, and whether it's something like a Lego group, okay, or the Ben and Jerry's, or then on the other end of the spectrum, a big bank or oil and gas or whatever. In some ways, my real gift in the world, and I think one of the beautiful things about purpose is it gets you away from the labels and roles that are, you could argue, ego-based, right? To saying, okay, so what is it I'm here to do, and how do I step into that? And so I was really clear that working and doing papers and classes and stuff was not where I was going to be at my best. Okay.
Well, yeah. I thought you were a Harvard professor. So,
that's okay. You guys just going to have to give that one up, Charlie.
I guess so.
All my friends happen to be doing all those things, and when we talk, they complain about all the things they have to do when they're as a professor that they wish they didn't have to do, and I don't have to do any of those things.
The thing about it is, Nick, you because I saw you on our last episode we did together, and you really oriented your body to face the audience like you were holding court or teaching class. So I do think you are a teacher or an educator at heart. But a good segue to that, because you talked about waking up people. What is your purpose statement?
Yeah, so my purpose is to wake you up and have you really finally be home.
To wake you up and have you really finally be home. And I thought it was wake up the few who wake up the many.
Well, that's the name. That's what the organization's purpose is.
Okay. And which is a good kind of clarification, because you help not only organizations discover their organizational purpose, you also help individuals discover their personal purpose. And what's the distinction or the difference? Like, if you're going to take an organization, is it like a longer journey, more conversations with the stakeholders versus a person and personal discovery they can go through your Purpose to Impact program?
Here's how I'll say it. I find that when we're working in companies, it's most important to help each individual leader discover their purpose as the first step. The reason why is that when you discover it, it's a very visceral experience, and you can talk about your own experience, where it's like there's a before and after moment in your life of like, you don't know, then you know, and you're like, how could I never know? Well, when you then look at and begin to work on what is the organization's purpose, then your criteria for what it needs to do and how it needs to impact you becomes clear, because you now know you want to have the same experience as when you discovered your purpose. So instead of having a bunch of silly words that sit in the lobby on a video and nobody cares about it, you end up with something that everybody goes, wow, that really, really matters. So it's a combined journey. I think the best organizations I've ever worked with who have organizational purpose have leaders who have a deep sense of individual purpose. And the ones that do everything right, but there's something missing, and so the magic is missing, is when they have leaders who don't have that deep sense of purpose, okay? But everything is in the lobby, the materials are there, it's on the walls, but when they go home, they leave it on the wall instead of they take it with them. And I've just known such powerful leaders who've led deeply purposeful organizations, and it's not like when they leave the building that it's with them all the time.
Yeah. I do, but right before we get into the program, I got just one more kind of personal Nick Craig discovery question, and then we'll get into like the program and why, Broad River and how many people have gone through the program. I want to go back to the book, Leading from Purpose. Maybe you can just touch on how the book came about. How long did it take you to endeavor to write that book, from the idea to the publication of it?
Talk about this for everybody listening from the place of what your experience of your own self is. The way purpose works is that you ignore it, and it keeps saying, no, you've got to go do this. And you keep ignoring it and keep ignoring it and keep ignoring it because you go, that's too hard. I don't want to do that. And it's just a lot of work or whatever. And at some point you realize that your purpose doesn't care. It's not interested in whether you're happy in the moment because it has a place it wants you to go. So the book for me was that, because I'd co-written two other books, and I knew just how difficult it was, how much energy it took, and all the things that go along with it. And I was like, oh. And then to write a book on your own, I'm like, oh my God. And how to make it really good. So I resisted. And finally I said, okay, I'm going to do this thing. And the minute I decide to do it, I get somebody who wants to help me write it so it really is good. And then I happened to bump into at a conference Brené Brown, and we had a couple minutes, and as everybody's doing exercise, I went up and said, do you actually know what your purpose is? She says, no, and I want to know. And I said, well, and she'd seen me before. She says, and you're the guy. I said, yeah, I'm the guy. So she said, she gave me turned over a business card, wrote her personal phone number on it, says, don't tell my assistant I gave this to you, but give me a call. And then we called and we talked, and I helped her go on the journey. And then she said, you've got to write the book. And I'm like, oh no, now I have Brené making it. And I'm going to give you my book agent, who also has Howard Schultz and the Clintons and everybody else. And it's like, oh no. And then she gets me a real New York editor and all the things you need. And I'm like, I am so screwed. Now I have to really write this thing. So that's what happened. And then I had to really write that thing. And I really had to really do it. And then I had all the help you needed. And then she did the foreword to the book because she insisted, which I thought was really interesting, because I was going to have other people who were more, business-wise or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I was like, okay, girl, let's do this thing. So anyway, so that, once again, I say this to all of you and say there's nothing linear or predictable about what I just said. But welcome to the world of purpose. If you really listen, it will take you on a journey that's much better than anything you could make up.
Man, there's, as our friend Davin likes to say, there's so good. You know, I noticed maybe a slight hesitancy on your part to talk about yourself. And so I'm glad I kept asking a little bit extra question, because that, like, I never would have known the whole backstory about the book, and our audience wouldn't have known it. And that's a really cool story. I mean, I had no idea. How long did you consult Brené to help her discover her purpose? Do you recall what her purpose statement is?
I can't remember. And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you.
Okay. We'll let her tell us.
At the same time, we had a number of chats over a fairly amazing period of time. Mm-hmm. And I will say to anybody who loves her work that in person, she is absolutely even 5 times more the person that you see when you talk, when you hear and she writes. And it's just, oh my gosh, it is so wonderfully amazing.
Wow. I love it. And then your book gets curated, and one of the sections of your book gets into the HBR series on purpose and meaning. And that's how we came across your book.
Yeah, actually, the article we published before the book.
Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, so that's how you found us. Yeah, that's how we found each other. Yep.
So you said we came across, and I think we were going through our year of purpose in 2019. We had read your article in the HBR series book, and I shared our company's purpose statement, furnishing life's best memories, and that we had a purpose activation committee, and you're like, I can't believe you guys are doing this stuff. That sounds cool. I said, yeah, we're super excited about it. I can't believe you teach and write on this. And so it was like kind of kindred spirits meeting. And I sent you our playbook and all that kind of stuff. And you said, yeah, my mom's in Greenville, South Carolina. That's not far from you guys. If I'm ever in Charlotte, we'll connect. Sounds great. Yeah, let's definitely connect. We were in Fort Mill, South Carolina. And then just a few months later, I think I see you at the Purpose 2030 conference that Aaron Hurst put on, sending the moonshot goal to where we're going to be by 2030, people, working and walking in their purpose, and flipping the stats. And so we got to meet in person, and we stayed in contact. And then you kind of became like the de facto kind of cornerstone keynote speaker at the Purpose Summit that Davin has put on the last 5 years or so. And then get to see you speak in person. And really, the breakout sessions that I attended that you ran at the University of Notre Dame, what I really like about your work is the questions. You ask these questions, and it's like a simple question, but it's so profound, and it's so efficient. It gets right at the heart of really the excavation work of that personal discovery. I think you've just got this great instinct and developed experience to know what questions to ask. Even the question you said that you asked Brené, you had the boldness to ask her when you interacted with her here just a few minutes ago. I think that's something that's really a key part of the program. So what led you, let's go into the program itself. How many people have you taken through the program? How often does the program run? And then, why did you decide to choose to host it in Charlotte or in Fort Mill, South Carolina at Broad River Retail?
Because you're just a crazy, amazing, wonderful guy. I couldn't help myself.
Yeah. Okay. Now the real answer.
Seriously. I mean, Charlie, you're one of those beautiful people who the little kid in you is still fully present.
He's still playing the game.
And he's still playing the game. And I think most people, most of us, we put the kid away and we bring it out on vacation or on the holidays or the weekends, and we put it back in and we go back to work. I don't know what you do when you're at home or on the weekends, but my sense is just everybody at the office knows that Charlie's little kid is always present all the time. And it's just the most funny, amazing thing. And you're also deeply wise. And that combination, I think, is where purpose mostly resides for most of us. Right? And my sense is you're trying to create an organization that is in the retail world, which is a really hard place, where you make sure that people have that. And then you had this insight that if people walked into a furniture store and they felt that, they were going to be more inclined to go buy their couch there than somewhere else. And with that, I would also say is that, when I've gone to this thing called the Purpose Summit, which I think anybody who's listening probably deserves to go to as well, you have like 100 of your people there, and it's kind of like, and they all have these amazing stories of how working for you has dramatically impacted the quality of their life. And so I think that is the ultimate gift of what it means to run a business. Is it's not business, it's life. And I think that that's really the work that you do. So I think that's a deeply purposeful organization that you're running. And from that perspective, when I first met you, I was like, I don't care what he's doing. Let's support him, because we just need more people doing this kind of work. So, that's why this stuff really matters. Because the truth of the matter is that people spend so much time at work these days. If you don't have purpose at work, what are you doing?
You're so generous in your praise, Nick, but you do make it challenging for a podcast interviewer. You answered
Charlie.
Charlie.
I'm interviewing you, by the way. You're not interviewing me, I don't think.
Well, you answered the third question first. So I got it. So I got it. You're testing me. I appreciate the kind words. We don't like to say that they work for me or for Manny. They work with us in our memory makers. We get to serve alongside them. But those were, and we get to work with some amazing memory makers who each have really incredible stories, who help us furnish life's best memories for others. And we get to do that together. Now, that's why you chose Broad River. Love that. Thank you. So, just how many people have gone through the program? I'm going to try to get this back on the tracks.
Look, at this point, whether it's 50,000, 60, or 70,000, I've lost count.
Okay.
Globally around the world, we teach programs on a weekly basis around the world, in all different environments. There's about 30 people who do most of the delivery of the programs, and each of them is unique, and each of them does their own expression of how they bring the work alive. Mm-hmm. Once in a while, they let me teach the course at this point, which is fine because I've taught it enough times. But, once in a while I get to hang out, and you guys and I got to hang out in Charlotte together.
Yeah.
And so I really had a great time hanging out and teaching the course with everybody. And so, yeah.
Well, Nick, this is incredible. This course, you're saying every week this course is being taught. You've got 30 different facilitators or so around the globe teaching the course. And we were so honored that you, the creator of the course, and I'm not trying to puff up your ego, but it is what it is. You came and spent 2 days with us. And also what people don't know, and I don't know if you mind me saying this, you had some military folks there, and you've got a little bit of a give back strategy. You and I got to talk at dinner. And are you willing to share a little bit about kind of what you extend to the military?
Yeah. So there's two groups. There's special operations, and they're the people who service all the different branches of the military and do special ops types of ventures. And as they're beginning their transition out of the military after 20 or 30 years of doing things that you can't do when you leave, they have to figure out what their identity is that isn't the one that they've had for most of their life. So they get to do the program, and they get to find out their deeper purpose, which is independent of the role or the task that they've done, which gives them more opportunity to be clear about how do they want to give their gift when they come out the other side. And so we give that to them as our gift to those who serve. Right?
Love it. Nick, what is, who should attend the Purpose to Impact Summit, this workshop? Is it someone who is trying to profoundly think about this topic? Is it someone who thinks they already have an idea about their purpose? Or, who's the ideal candidate or person to attend?
We've run the program in organizations where nobody gets to choose, and they just have to do it anyway. And what they find is somewhere in the 2 days that this is probably the best gift the company ever gave them, because it's the first thing that wasn't shoved down their throat, and it was about who they are. And that has always been an amazing experience, to watch people with their arms crossed all of a sudden be the greatest advocates for what we're talking about. And we've done it from the senior leaders to people who are just starting to work in their 20s for a company. And it's always amazing to see how it plays out and how people benefit from it. Okay. I find that purpose is especially helpful for those of us in moments when we are in some type of major transition in our life, when there's a part of us that no longer serves us. And it could be when you leave college, or when you're in your late 20s, early 30s, when you realize it's time to decide what you really want to do when you grow up, or when you're in your late or mid 50s and you realize that the last 30 years has been like, what was I thinking? What am I going to do? Because I'm not done, but I don't want to just be working for something that doesn't make sense. So there's a number of different moments. And for companies, it's the same. Every company has moments where you've really realized you got to get it right because something massive needs to be let go of and brought in to get to the next level. It's like the whole major next chapter. And so those are the places where purpose has its most value, because it's about listening to that deep voice inside of us that knows. And if we listen to it fully, it will take care of us, as opposed to many of those other voices in our head that tend to have interesting outcomes sometimes.
That's really well said, Nick. How did you figure out how to curate some of the questions, the excavation that kind of takes place on this personal journey, personal discovery?
My gift is to come up with really wonderfully, deeply insightful questions. So one of the questions I have, which is for anybody who's listening, is think about how you'd answer this question. What is it, if you look at the next 6 months, if you're starting the new year and all the things that come along with that, what is it that really excites you and scares you a little bit? What would you have to stop doing to spend time doing that? In some sense, that's the place that purpose resides for all of us. Okay? It's really exciting. It really excites that little kid, but it's a little scary as well because it's unknown. There's an unknown territory. There's no map where you want to go for you, and you're going to have to figure it out. But it will be enormously, powerfully satisfying on the other side. So the answer to that particular question for anybody listening can be really helpful. Another way to think about it is, what is it that you see that needs to get done that nobody else sees? And you see it. It's so obvious. And you say to people, and they all look at you like you got three heads. Well, everybody who has ever got a Nobel Prize had everybody have that reaction. And the reason they got the Nobel Prize was because they saw what others didn't see, and they went and did it. Right? Or got the Pulitzer, or whatever the case may be. So in some ways, those two questions are ones that we all can answer on a regular basis.
I think the way you phrased it, your unique gifting, and I've heard you say you believe everyone's got this a certain unique gifting, and yours is to ask these really deep, insightful questions. And it's one of the first things I've noticed about you, and just your writings, and it's like, man, this guy really knows how to ask questions that when I stop and think about them, it stops me in my tracks. And really, just in terms of how we live our life, you talked about the person who's like, what was I doing the last 30 years? Like, if we're all swimming in a lane or running a certain race, gosh, what regret would show up if we got to the end of that road or the end of that race and said, I've been running the wrong race. I've been going the wrong direction. So to kind of really immerse yourself in this structured, intentional means of being reflective and getting back to the core of who you are and what lights you up, it really ensures that it minimizes life regrets, because you realize you're gonna run the race that's most meaningful, most powerful with your one and precious life that you have. I think it's such a beautiful, powerful thing, which is why I think people should endeavor to be in this program and to go through it. Do you have a favorite story, Nick? Like, or one that kind of stands out that if I were to ask you, did you have like a really skeptical person and they actually said, okay, I'll play, I'll go along, and then they just kind of lit up, and where they were maybe skeptical at first, or just a certain story that you have gone through over the thousands of people that like you reflect on and said, I really like to tell this story about who's gone through the event? I'll
tell one that's relevant to you and me and to this series is Manny, who just did the podcast, who's your
business partner.
Mm-hmm. So Charlie, as you guys can imagine, Charlie is Mr. Purpose, right? You've been Mr. Purpose for a while. And so what's interesting is that if one person really is something, it doesn't leave as much room for everybody else, because it's just the way it is. And so when Manny walked in the room, it was pretty clear, it was pretty clear that he didn't know if he really wanted to be there or not. Okay? He's a really good COO. And you guys had a meeting the day before where you had some fairly challenging conversations. about the difference between what everybody wanted to do versus what was actually in the bank to be able to do. Right? And now he was going to have to spend 2 days hanging out with us because Charlie somehow corralled him to be there. And at least that's the way it looked for me. As he was, and it didn't take much for him to be like, well, okay. And he figured he couldn't get out of it because you were there and you were going to like torture him if he didn't stand up.
Well, to be fair, I think we were both like in the midst of a really busy season, and I was even saying like, how can I get out of this? Because I don't know if I can deck 2 days to it. What if I told Nick I'll do it another time? But I was like, no, we're counting on you. I was like, yeah, okay. I've always wanted to do it. I'm going to do it. But yeah, we all had second thoughts beforehand. Just because busy executives, and you're like 2 full days, and I can't be halfway in, halfway out. I got to immerse myself in it. Okay.
Well, Manny, I watched go from being like, Charlie, I'm going to kill you, to really having a set of epiphanies and a profound set of insight and clarity about who he is, what matters to him, but also who you are. Because I think part of what happens in the journey of discovering our purpose is we get to witness other people's discovery journey. And together we go to a different place.
Yeah.
So it's not just about you as an individual, it's about you and the others that you go on the journey with you.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I think the power of the experience of the 2 days was not only what you both discovered, but what you discovered about each other. And I really feel like his way of talking about this is just so wonderful because he had to go the whole distance.
Yeah.
He had to go the whole distance. You, on the other hand, you're already sitting on the Temple of the Mount, and it's like, okay, which version of the 10 Commandments do I want to take down?
Yeah. Well,
right?
I don't know if that.
So slightly.
I would not put it like that.
Well, let's just say, I mean, you were already in this. My sense is you and I were playing with upgrades. We were installing, and we were really putting something that was like. And so I would say that one of the most recent wonderful examples of that is that.
Okay.
And anybody who wants to can listen to that podcast conversation that you did with him. And just listen and see what you hear.
Yeah. I mean, I think we both got a lot out of it, and I know he did, and I did as well. And, one of my favorite parts that was really unexpected, and you talked about, that you mentioned just a moment ago, going through it together and seeing others go through it. Manny was not in my cohort, and I was with 3 people I had never met, nothing in common with, really had never, and the fact of how we can be so supportive of each other, so vulnerable with each other, and develop such a close-knit, tight bond with each other in just a matter of just hours, it was and not even under duress. We're just going through a workshop together, was really, really special. I joke, but I'm serious. Like, I thought I had the best group, but I was just like, I was super inspired by the people, Terry, Kip, and Sean, who I got to go through that with. And then you would come into our breakout sessions and add some nuggets of wisdom or questions to help kind of make sure we were going along the way we needed to. And it was really, really cool and unexpected and really delightful to kind of go through that process with them. I would not have gotten where I ended up getting to without my cohort and their inputs. And I think we had mutual respect for each other and each other's value that we added, and we're really listening and dialed into each other. So that was a cool, unexpected part. Nick, we're probably out of time for this one. I've super enjoyed this conversation. I've gotten to know you a whole lot more, the program a lot more, and some of your, we pulled some nuggets of your wisdom and history out. Is there anything else you would say to someone who's maybe contemplating, their own purpose or what they might get out of this and the reason to do it?
I think in the world we live in today, where we could argue life feels a lot more uncertain and unpredictable than it did 10, 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. The question is, where do you find that sense of being grounded in that certainty? And my experience is that when we have a deeper sense of purpose inside of ourselves, that becomes the place that we can stand on.
Love it.
And in some ways, that's the gift that it always gives. Purpose is most helpful to us when we need meaning and there isn't any.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And whatever version of that looks like with whatever business or organization or reality that we all happen to live in, could, even more helpful.
Well, I highly endorse the work that you and the Core Leadership Institute are doing and the Purpose to Impact program. Nick, it's enjoyed having you on the podcast again. How can people stay connected with you? And what would you, I know you've got a podcast now that I
do podcasts. I do podcasts as well. And if you go to the coreleader.com website, then you can see both that as well as many of the cases and examples and stories of all the things that we're up to and doing, as well as the future adventures if you want to join us. So we look forward to having you all come hang out with us. And Charlie, I look forward to hanging out with you as well.
Love it. And Nick, the following day after we got to spend with you, or the couple of days afterwards, we got to go to High Point University and an awards gala. And one of the things they gave to the award winners was this compass. And when we talk about discovering our true north, it's a good compass to remind us. Yeah, it's a beautiful compass, and to remind us to stay on the path of our purpose. And so, Nick, thanks so much for being a repeat guest here on Stories from the River. It was an honor to host the Purpose to Impact program and workshop at the Mill at Fort Mill, South Carolina. coreleader.com, and also you can subscribe to your podcast. Is it Leading from Purpose? Is that the name of the podcast?
Yes,
Yep. So we'll put links to that, and and people can connect with you on LinkedIn, I assume, Nick, or from the website. Any final words before we break here?
No, Charlie, I just want to thank you so much for having an opportunity to spend more time hanging out and telling stories together, which I always love doing with you.
Yeah, I know. We need more nights at dinner where we can tell more stories and go around the room and hear other people's stories. That was a fun time we had hanging out. It's always fun to spend some time with you. So, hey, podcast fans, thanks so much for checking out this episode of Stories from the River. Try to bring you the freshest new content here for another year in 2025. Every Tuesday and Thursday, you can check us out on YouTube for the video version, or Apple or Spotify, or wherever you get your fresh podcast content. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you, Nick.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to Stories from the River. To check out more episodes, visit storiesfromtheriver.com. Join us again next week, and remember to like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast.